Welcome to Foss Fiction. Thank you for joining us for Chapter 1 of The Guardian of Ailos, written and performed by Michael B. Foss. Nelson's flashlight danced across the cave wall. Dust sparkled in the heavy night air, and flecks of old sandstone floated around the light. His heart raced with a mix of excitement and anxiety coursing through his veins. "Now, look at this," his best friend Syd whispered across the cave. Her voice trembled with enthusiasm. She stood there about 2 inches taller than Nelson, but tonight she had decided to wear her hair up in a bun, giving her an extra inch or so. Her blue jean overalls and a blue striped shirt clashed perfectly with her black high-top shoes. This was her adventure outfit, and she had been wearing it a lot recently. Nelson also wore his usual adventure outfit, whatever was in the pile of clean clothes when Syd snuck over and interrupted his bedtime routine. It meant mismatched shoes and a wrinkled t-shirt with a faded superhero logo. His wild, curly red hair stuck out in all directions, a stark contrast to Syd's neat bun. Syd had found the cave at the beginning of summer while exploring the forest behind their apartment complex. Night after night, she would show up at Nelson's bedroom window and beg him to come with her. He had refused for the better part of a month, but tonight he finally gave in. Against his better judgment, he found himself sliding out of bed, crawling out of his apartment window, and following his friendly neighborhood Indiana Jones into the forest. Nelson hung back, his mind racing with all the reasons they shouldn't be here. Sneaking out was bad enough, but getting lost in an abandoned cave, that was a whole new level of trouble. "Are you sure about this?" Nelson muttered, his freckled face scrunched with worry. "Come on, scaredy cat. This has got to be the greatest discovery of all time," Syd's enthusiastic whisper echoed throughout the cave. Part of him wanted to run, but another part, the part that always gave in to Syd's adventures, urged Nelson forward. "I'm not scared," Nelson whispered back. "I'm just being cautious." In the center of the room stood a lone, slender column of stone. Atop it sat something that looked like an old book, large, wrinkly, and bound in black leather. The knot in Nelson's stomach tightened. "Scaredy cat," Nelson muttered to himself. A faint blue light started glowing from the center of the book. Nelson's eyes widened as he made out the details of the small gemstone. Perfectly shaped like a diamond, it couldn't be larger than a silver dollar. Something swirled inside of it, mesmerizing and otherworldly. "Whoa!" Nelson's mouth fell open in wonder. Then he clutched his throat in sheer terror as Syd, in her excitement, accidentally blew a mouthful of dust straight into his face. He sucked down the ancient particles of rock, which went to war with his lungs, resulting in a loud coughing fit. All of the former intrigue surrounding the gemstone vanished in an instant. Meanwhile, Syd started to reach for the book. "I bet this thing is 1,000 years old at least." Nelson shook his head, wheezing. "Syd," he gasped between labored breaths, "we really shouldn't be touching things. We don't know anything about this place." Syd listened and withdrew her hand. "You're right," she said. "We don't know anything about this place." "Thank you," Nelson breathed easy. "Let's just... But how much you want to bet this is some kind of ancient history book? It probably has all your answers inside of it." Syd returned to the book and took hold of the cover. No, Nelson begged. "Please. It'll be fine. Stop worrying so much. It's just a book." Syd placed her free hand on Nelson's shoulder. "What's the worst that could happen?" A loud crack sounded outside of the cave. Nelson jumped, almost straight out of his mismatched shoes. A massive pulse of energy passed through the cave, sending waves of goosebumps down his back. "Oh no, 8 already?" he asked. "Happy 4th of July, Syd said, slapping Nelson on the back. "No, Syd." He rushed over to the mouth of the cave and stuck out his head, waiting for the next explosion. "My mom's gonna freak, and if she—" Bang! A second round of fireworks erupted over the trees. Bright reds and blues and brilliant golds popped and glittered through the branches of the old forest. "Relax," Syd said. "The fireworks just started. We've got plenty of time." Nelson shook his head with a sigh. "Trust me," Syd said, looking up from the old book. "By the time she gets back, you'll be fast asleep." Syd started to lift the book. "But what about your dad?" Nelson said as a sad attempt to distract her. "Won't he—" Syd paused and raised her eyebrow. Moments like these made Nelson wonder why she ever wanted to be his friend. She knew he wasn't like her, but still, she insisted on bringing him along. She knew he would protest and freak out when things got a little too late, but there she was, dragging him along anyway. He couldn't be too upset, though. If it wasn't for her, he probably wouldn't have any friends at all. At least, not here. In an instant, the forest disappeared as Syd took hold of Nelson and pulled him back over by his shirt. His curly red hair bounced and flickered like fire as he stumbled over to the book. "Look!" Syd held out her flashlight and highlighted some words on the cover, previously unseen due to all of the dust. The sight of it reminded Nelson of the limestone still lingering on his tongue. The letters looked hollow, like they were meant to be filled by some sort of coloring that had eroded a long time ago. Syd whispered as her fingers traced the grooves. "Hidden realms and sacred paths." The blue gemstone set into the cover began to pulse with light. "Nope, no way." Nelson turned to walk away, but Syd grabbed his arm and spun him back around. "Come on, Nell. You're telling me you're not one bit curious?" Her eyes sparkled with excitement, daring him to admit he was intrigued. Nelson hesitated, torn between his caution and his growing curiosity. "Curious? Yes," he said. He looked down at the book, then back at Syd as he stepped away. "But stupid? No, I don't think so." "Fine," Syd sighed. "If you don't want to be here and experience a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, then you're free to go. But I'm staying." She paused. Nelson didn't like the pause. He knew what was coming next. "And," she continued, "if I die, well, I guess I'll die alone." Nelson lifted his head in frustration and closed his eyes. Did she really need to be that dramatic? This is how it always started. He'd argue, then she'd give him puppy dog eyes, and inevitably, he'd give in. But now it was getting late. He could hear the fireworks building in intensity, so instead of wasting time, "Fine, I'll stay," he muttered. Hopefully this way they could both get what they wanted, adventure and home before their parents. Syd smiled, her whole face lighting up. "But," Nelson lifted a finger, "if I get one whiff of something crazy or dangerous, I'm out. Got it?" Syd lunged at her friend and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Got it." Nelson shrugged her off before his cheeks went full red. Syd let out a quick squeal of excitement before spinning around to open up the book. She flipped a page, then another. "Well?" Nelson craned his neck to look over her shoulder. "Weird," Syd said. "The pages, they're blank." "Blank?" Nelson asked, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "Yeah. Here, look." Syd lifted the book from the podium. Click. The sound of rocks shifting beneath them filled the cave. "Put it back," Nelson yelled. He took a few steps back to distance himself. "This is exactly what I was talking about." Suddenly, a bright light shot up like a column of fire from the podium. Syd dropped the book and took a few steps back of her own. The book, however, never reached the rock podium beneath it. It just kind of floated there. Letters and symbols, definitely not English, started filling the ceiling of the cave. "One whiff, Syd," Nelson said. "I'm out of here." He started to walk away, but then his friend stepped closer to the book. "Come on," he moaned. "We really shouldn't." "Wait," she said, holding out a hand. "I think I've seen these symbols before." The whole cave started humming with energy as Syd stood over the book. "I know these words," she said, looking back at her friend, her whole face glowing with blue light. The moment she turned around and took hold of the book, a massive force of wind swept through the cave. Syd's entire body left the ground, her head whipped back, light shooting from her eyes, back arched like she had a string pulling her from the waist. Nelson fought against the wind, but the force of it pushed him back. His feet slid across the rocky floor. Inside of his stomach, he felt like magnets were pushing against each other. The more he strained, the harder it was to move. Then, without warning, the light from the cave surged, exploding like a shockwave. Nelson braced, arms crossed in front of his face as the rushing wind pushed him further from his friend. He pushed and pushed, reaching for Syd, but it was useless. He was no match for this kind of force. Even if he did get to her, what would he do then? The answer to that question didn't matter. Not really. He just wanted to get to Syd. Then he heard her voice. Well, not exactly her voice. It sounded like 100 of her voices, like a choir of Syds reading something from the book. "In the shadows where moonlight wanes, with ancient words the secrets lay, a key concealed, a guardian's might, unveiled by she who seeks the light. A circle cast with hearts sincere, the realm protected from evils near. She speaks the word, unveils the gate, and guards the realm against an evil fate." As the final word left her lips, the light from the cave began to rush from the walls and into the silver locket around Syd's neck. It looked like water spilling through a crack backward. The whole room looked like it was moving in reverse. That's when Nelson realized something more serious was happening. Syd looked weak, her body limp, held up by the power of the wind. With the last surge of light filling the locket, he watched Syd's legs buckle, like all of the life had been sucked out of her, and with no warning, the wind stopped, releasing everything in its wake, including Nelson. He didn't waste any time. He crawled as fast as he could over to Syd's lifeless body. "Syd, are you okay? Syd!" Nelson lifted her head onto his lap. "Oh, no, no, no." He started patting her cheeks, trying to wake her. "Come on, Syd, wake up." Tears started to fill his eyes as he pressed his ear against her chest. Adrenaline-filled blood rushed to his head, and for a moment the only sound he could hear was the beat of his own heart against his temples. "Please," he whispered, pressing further in. "I don't know what to do without you." Nelson sat back in defeat. His chest felt hollow. The knot pulled tighter in his stomach. He thought of all the ways he could have stopped her from coming to this stupid cave. Could he? Was there any chance she would have listened? Maybe that was the real problem. He had no control over any of this. He felt powerless. When Nelson finally turned his attention back to Syd, he noticed something strange. A soft, blue light leaked out from beneath her skin, like steam rising from a river on a cold morning. Despite the chaos and all of his worry, she looked peaceful. He wasn't sure if this was a good sign, but at least something was happening. The light lingered for a long time before Syd finally opened her eyes. Nelson didn't even notice at first. He kept drifting in and out of thought, trying to figure out what he was to do next. It wasn't until he heard his name that he realized. "Nelson?" she said, her voice weakened by fatigue. "I'm here," he replied. You're okay. I got you." Nelson rose to his knees and gave her his hand to help her sit up, but her body remained slumped over, still too weak to hold herself up. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I saw something, Nell." "Shh," he soothed her, rubbing her back. "It's okay. It was only a dream." "No, not a dream," she said. "Something bad." "Bad?" he asked. "Like a nightmare?" Syd groaned as she fixed her posture, pressing her hand into Nelson's for leverage. "He's angry," she said. "Who? Who is angry?" Nelson asked, his worry starting to grow with each passing second. Syd's eyes found Nelson's, but they were distant. They somehow looked through him, shifting from side to side, like they were trying to focus on a fading image. She shook her head. He felt her body tremble. "You can tell me, Syd. Who did you see?" "You won't believe me." Syd closed her eyes. "Of course I will, Syd. I'm your best friend. You can tell me anything." Syd took a deep breath. "Nelson, I saw a dragon." "A dragon?" he asked. "It was horrible. I saw him as clearly as I see you now." Uh, I... Nelson didn't know what to say. She couldn't be serious, could she? "I know," Syd said. "It sounds crazy, but trust me, he's real. And he's coming here." Nelson's face went blank. He tried to nod along and will himself to believe her, but they were in Texas, not Middle Earth. Syd must have noticed because she hung her head and wouldn't look at him any longer. Maybe you just hit your head. We should get you home so you can..." "He was real, Nelson." Syd's head snapped back up and she glared at him intensely. "I know what I saw." "The book," she said, reaching over and grabbing it off the ground beside her. Nelson flinched as she did. "There is something about this book. It showed me things, real things, things about me, everything I've ever done, like it wanted me to know that it was telling me the truth." This caught Nelson off guard. He really was trying his best to believe his friend, but now she was sounding crazy. Okay, okay, slow down. So let me get this straight." He stood up. "The book wants you to believe that a dragon is coming? And then it showed you the dragon?" Not exactly," Syd said. "More like the book confirmed everything I saw in the vision. It's all right here." She poked the cover of the book. Nelson nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "So, why you?" he asked. Syd hung her head again, knowing that what she said next would be hard to understand. "I think I'm supposed to stop him." "Mm-hmm. Okay." Nelson tightened his lips, taking in the phrase and turning it over in his mind. "Stop him," he finally repeated. "Look, I don't even fully understand it," Syd said, her voice rising with frustration. "I just know I can't ignore it. Everything inside of me tells me that this is true. It tells me..." "What, Syd? What?" Nelson's frustration boiled over, his face flushing red. "It tells you that some angry dragon is coming here to do, I don't know, whatever an angry dragon does, and you're just supposed to stop it? You're just a kid, Syd. We're just kids." Nelson stood there panting, his hands squeezed into fists. Syd struggled to her feet and made her way slowly over to Nelson. "You're right. I'm just a kid. And this sounds crazy, but..." She put her hand on Nelson's shoulder. "But do you remember the poem I read?" "Yeah?" Nelson said. What about it? Well, it's the same one my mom would read to me every night before she... Syd's voice trailed off, and Nelson saw the familiar pain in his eyes. Syd's mother disappeared years ago. It was part of what brought them together as friends. They both knew what it was like to lose a parent, kind of. His dad was still around a little bit, but her mom, they can't find her. Syd reached up and took hold of her locket, rubbing it between her thumb and forefinger. A faint blue light began to emanate from it. She used to tell me these stories about a guardian, Syd continued. She protected hidden realms from an evil dragon, and every night, my mom would finish her story with that exact poem. She would tuck me into bed and kiss my forehead. Then without fail, she'd say, Sweetie, do you know why I tell you this story? Dragon stories are here to remind us that even the worst of evils can and will be defeated, even if it's by the most unlikely of heroes. Syd let go of the locket and looked back at Nelson. She made me feel strong, but I thought they were just fairy stories. I never thought they could be true. Nelson felt something shift inside of him, like despite how crazy his friend sounded, he could believe her. Moved by empathy, her story didn't have to make sense to him. As long as it made sense to her, he knew what it was like to lose a parent. He knew the pain of trying to cope or even trying to forget. When you're sad, sometimes even the good memories sting like paper cuts. So, he decided to believe her. Okay, so in these stories, he said, his voice gentle now, you're the guardian? I think so, Syd replied. Nelson propped his back up against the wall of the cave and puffed out a breath of air. He thought about his own mother, working late shifts at the hospital to keep food on the table. He thought about Syd's dad, who always seemed lost in his own world since his wife left. He didn't know how they could possibly handle something like this. But, I can't believe I'm saying this, Nelson said. What's next? What do we have to do? A smile of relief crossed Syd's lips. The fact that he used the word we made her feel a little less crazy, a little less alone. I'm not completely sure, she shrugged. But if the dragon is coming here, I think we're supposed to go find him and stop him. But isn't he in another world? Nelson asked. Even the thought of that question made Nelson shiver. The sense of feeling small crept over him. And how do we find him? Syd looked down at the book. This might be a good start. It showed me everything else tonight. It must have some kind of map. Or something. What about that? Nelson asked, pointing at the silver necklace still glowing around her neck. Well, it's definitely connected because it's never done this before. She held it up in front of her. And after whatever that whole explosion thing was, it feels different. Like it's alive. As she took a deep breath, Nelson saw a stream of light flow out of the locket. Strange, he thought. And I feel, I don't know, stronger, Syd said. I guess you've got a lot of reading to do, Nelson said, gesturing to the book. We've got a lot of reading to do, Syd corrected him with a smile. You're in this with me too, remember? Nelson couldn't help but smile back. Yeah, I guess I am. A crescendo of fireworks exploded over the cave, and Nelson jumped, realizing that they wouldn't have long before their parents started to worry. He rushed over to the cave entrance. For now, can we go home? He asked. I really don't want to make my mom upset. Syd nodded, carefully tucking the book into her backpack, and smiled. Yes, she chuckled. Let's go home. As they made their way out of the cave, she paused and grabbed Nelson by the hand. Hey, Nell, she asked. Yeah? Thanks for believing in me. I don't think I can do this alone. Nelson felt a warmth spread through his chest. That's what best friends are for, right? Besides, someone's got to keep you from getting into too much trouble. Syd grinned and playfully punched his arm. Race you home. And with that, they took off running through the woods, laughing and dodging tree branches, the weight of their newfound destiny momentarily forgotten in the joy of just being kids on a summer night. That was Chapter 1 of The Guardian of Ailos. As a reminder, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment or come find us on Substack, and we'll be right back next week with Chapter 2.